You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 28th of July 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing in association with Addis. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme. Israel's aid drops into Gaza are being welcomed, but international agencies warn they're a drop in the ocean compared to what Gaza needs. We'll have the latest on what could be a critical week for the territory to avoid starvation. After that, we head to Cambodia's border with Thailand, where a ceasefire has just been agreed. We'll also hear about Okinawa's brand new theme park, located just an hour from US military bases. And we'll look at why Dubai is turning its malls into running tracks. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. We will start with Gaza, where warnings from humanitarian agencies and international governments about looming starvation appear to have convinced Israel to relent somewhat over the weekend in its ongoing war, allowing an increase of food aid as well as daily pauses in the conflict to let that aid reach the population. It remains a far cry from hopes of an actual ceasefire, which some 25 nations around the world had called for last week. Well, we're joined now by Layla Milana Allen, Monocle's Middle East correspondent. Layla, always good to have you on the show. We do have to start with the rather desperate news, frankly, of starvation that is already happening in Gaza. The health ministry has put out some numbers. What is your sense of those numbers and how they jive with what international aid groups are saying?
They are pretty much exactly the same. The numbers that the health ministry are getting are coming from doctors and aid agencies working on the ground. So they are directly coming from those who have treated people who are starving and dying. We know that at least a dozen more people have died over the last 24 hours. That leads us up to more than 130 now who have died from starvation in the course of the war. Of course, the vast majority of those over the last week, and 3/4 of those have been children. We've obviously all seen the absolutely horrifying pictures of children who are little more than skin and bone, a few-month-old babies being buried. One the other day was buried. She weighed less than she had when she was born. She'd been 6 pounds when she was born, and she'd dropped to just 4 pounds by the time that she was buried. So we are looking at absolutely dire conditions here. And it's just really important to point out when we talk about, a switch in aid policy or any kind of change in aid policy. These things aren't a switch. Once you enter phase 5 of famine, which is where we are now, it's a little bit complicated because the IPC, which is the independent organisation that says sort of what stage of food insecurity we're at, and it says that 1/4 of Gazans now are in the catastrophic stage, which is where you're entering acute starvation and imminent death. They don't actually decide whether there is a famine. That's for the UN and international organisations to decide. But they have said that with the UN that we are entering stage 5 of famine now, and that doesn't just suddenly stop if you get food in. This is the point at which it's irreversible for human bodies, even if their lives are saved.
That is a stark account of the situation, frankly, in Gaza at the moment. But we do have to ask, Layla, regardless of, as you say, even if starvation is already happening, and that is something that can't necessarily be turned around for everyone, can you tell us about how much of a shift there has been to this point in the last 24 hours or so, both kind of with some trucks coming in and these airdrops? Even that is presumably not enough.
Absolutely, it's nowhere near enough. I mean, the most significant shift has been over the last few days in public opinion, and following that in governmental opinion. The pressure rightly exerted on Israel in terms of allowing aid in has hugely swelled because, of course, we're no longer talking about a war here. We are talking about the very simple, fundamental humanitarian practices, the fact that you cannot starve a population for any reason. Now, finally, after days and days of pressure of Israel's allies standing up and saying, that simple fact, regardless of what they feel about the war itself, we have seen a small change. Now, A couple of days ago, Israel said that they would start letting aid drops in. Aid drops are completely not only pointless, but potentially damaging in this situation. Aid parachute drops are for humanitarian disasters. They're for situations where there's been mass flooding, where there's been a tsunami, where there's been an earthquake, where you physically cannot reach the area. They are incredibly imprecise and they are also dangerous. Now, those started first with the Qataris and Jordanians doing that from Friday. Now other countries are doing it too, and the UK is preparing itself to do so. A tiny amount of aid compared to what's needed has got into Gaza that way over the weekend. And of course, as we expected, as happened last time, there have been injuries. 11 Palestinians were killed when one of these pallets fell directly on their tent. Gaza is essentially a moonscape now. 92% of housing units have been either severely damaged or completely destroyed. People are living in tents everywhere. There is absolutely no way to avoid injury and possible death when you drop these things. There's also no way to calculate exactly who's getting aid, how much of it. You can't really tell. Now, finally, Israel has let in a few UN trucks. The UN has been calling increasingly loudly over the last week, saying we have all the food ready for 3 months of feeding right there on the border. Just let it in. Last week, the Israeli government tried to accuse the UN of stopping the aid themselves by refusing to work with their Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, this Israeli government and American mercenary-backed organization that has, of course, shot nearly 1,000 Palestinians while trying to get aid. The UN, of course, says that that's a military organization and won't work with it. Finally, Israel's allowed 120 trucks in yesterday. That is a drop in the ocean. Gaza needed 500 to 600 trucks of aid per day before the war started, when people weren't starving. The level of what's needed now is a sort of flood of humanitarian aid. And most importantly, this idea that they're going to let a little bit of aid in now, that's not really the point. Just stopping any more people from dying of starvation right now, as I said, people who are at this level of starvation now, they need consistent food support for their bodies to ever regain any form of normality. What people around the world, activists, the UN, governmental leaders are calling for is a full stop to this block on aid in Gaza and to keep the stream going constantly now.
Well, and when you just finally, Layla, you talk about a full allowance of humanitarian aid and a full stop to the blockade, even that suggests that we are far away from the even broader call for an actual ceasefire. Israel has said it will now have a military pause of a few hours, about 10 hours a day. But that too suggests that the actual ceasefire is very far away.
Exactly. The idea that they're going to stop. Because, of course, don't forget that while everyone is focused quite rightly on the starvation of people in Gaza, they are still every day being hit by consistent airstrikes, by shelling. We've, of course, seen a very large military campaign launched on central Gaza last week in one of the only areas that had until then been safe. So people are not only desperately trying to get food, but they are trying to avoid, dying, being hit by one of these bombs at the same time. So it doesn't seem likely at all that we're looking at a ceasefire right now if we're looking at these few hour a day pauses in different areas to be able to get aid in. And really, talk of a ceasefire at the moment has completely frozen because, as I say, so much focus is on just trying to save the lives of people who are facing imminent death in the next few days from starvation. We're still at exactly the same point with ceasefire talks where Hamas says we will not agree to a ceasefire unless it's one that leads to the eventual end of the war in Gaza. And Israel says that they want to continue having security control in Gaza. Some leaders in the Israeli government say they want to occupy Gaza. They're saying that very loudly and openly now in the future. So that really is a sort of fundamental block there in the middle. And just finally, this issue of Palestinian statehood, which now has sort of been raised. There's going to be this meeting at the UN this week, led by the French and the Saudis, which was supposed to be in June, but it was postponed because of the Iran-Israel war, talking about giving Palestine a state of Palestine statehood, and they really are pushing for that now. And the idea of that, certainly for Emmanuel Macron, is that he wants Palestinians to have sort of the authority as a state to be able to negotiate on stronger footing, so that it's not just Hamas negotiating, but some sort of Palestinian government negotiating as well. It might be easier not only to get a ceasefire through there, in his idea, but also actually, any future negotiations for peace in the future. And Keir Starmer, of course, of the UK, is being lent on heavily there. Thus far, he's deflecting. He's just focusing on aid drops and potentially helping some injured children. But he himself has said, state has an inalienable right for the Palestinians, but a ceasefire would make it easier. His own MPs from the Foreign Affairs Committee came back and said, yeah, but to have a ceasefire, Palestinians have to have any sort of territory left at all, which if we continue this war in Gaza, they won't. And secondly, you can't put conditions on an inalienable right. If it's inalienable for them to have a state, we need to give it to them now. So that's the other sort of thing bubbling this week that does seem to put even more pressure on Israel there to firstly allow aid in freely and secondly eventually bring this horrific war to an end.
Leila Milana Allen, Monocle's Middle East correspondent, thank you very much for joining us. And now here's Anita Riota with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. U.S. President Donald Trump is meeting British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in Scotland today. The two leaders are expected to discuss the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza and trade between their nations. This is Trump's first visit to the U.K. since being elected to his second term. Russia has launched direct flights to North Korea. This comes as the two nations continue to strengthen ties. Operated by Nordwind Airlines, the first flight took off from Moscow yesterday and landed in Pyongyang 8 hours later. The carrier, which used to take Russians to holiday destinations in Europe, has made the move as options for Russian tourists to travel abroad continue to decline. And a new Taiwanese television series that imagines the run-up to an invasion by China is getting huge reviews by viewers. The show, called 0 Day Attack, is the first program featuring this sensitive topic, which has resonated with the public over the heightened military threats from China. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Anita. Now, after nearly a week of clashes along the border between Thailand and Cambodia, the two sides do appear to have agreed a ceasefire, an unconditional one, in talks in Malaysia, announced by the country's prime minister, ending what had quickly become the deadliest clashes in a decade between these two Southeast Asian neighbours. Surveying the Cambodian side of the border over the past couple of days has been Nathan Paul Southern, Director of Operations at the Eyewitness Project. And before the ceasefire was announced, he sent us these clips for the mood from the ground.
Right now, we are trying to follow along the conflict between the Cambodia and Thai border. We have arrived in Poi Phet, which is one of the biggest border cities between the two countries. It is the main crossing point for day traders, all the way to backpackers who are traveling Southeast Asia. Now this city is incredibly quiet. It's eerily so. It is a city that is actually 400-kilometre drive from the Preah temple that is disputed, but somehow is still facing a quite significant build-up of Thai troops on the other side of the border, with tanks facing the border point right now. This city has recently been known mostly for its illicit economy, mostly around scam centres. They do romance-type scams around the world, often using human trafficking slave victims to do that. What's happened since this conflict has escalated has been that a lot of these scam compounds have decided to relocate to safer areas of the country or to adjacent states that aren't in conflict, and a lot of the really large, powerful criminal syndicates have used this as an opportunity to consolidate control and lock down their compounds. Now, there are maybe fewer compounds operating, but they are really heavily enforced, and people are not able to leave, and we know that people are being locked in their rooms 24 hours, and some people are even unaware there seems to be a conflict on. Travelling between Siem Reap and Poi Phet province, we encountered several dozen buses, local public buses to large coaches, all from Phnom Penh, that had been specifically brought up towards the border region to help with evacuations. So these buses were doing constant shifts of picking up people from areas of heavier fighting and bringing them to several displaced persons camps that are building up in the country right now. It seems that the state is trying to assist those who desperately do not want to be trapped in areas of fighting. The one exception we can see here in Poi Pet is driving around and looking at the human trafficking crisis. There are still countless people stuck behind cages in this city, right on the front of where the Thai military are and where fighting could extend to, who look like they have no options to get out. As we speak to more people along the border areas, and especially those ones that are anticipating fighting but have yet to have it reach them, we are finding it very difficult to verify information. There are a lot of rumours spreading around, and this seems to be spreading into a growing sense of nationalism across both sides of the conflict. Stories of Khmer soldiers being beheaded, several incidents being reported of the use of toxic gas by Thai troops. None of this, however, has been verified. None of this we've been able to find in any form of international reporting, but we are trying to get more verification of potential war crimes that could be happening on the ground. There is a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of confusion, and there is a lot of anger on the border right now. Just been travelling through Samrong City, where there was quite intense shelling last night, yesterday during the day, and earlier today as well. There was quite significant hit in Samrong around noon today. We met around maybe about 200 local people from the area who'd been instructed to leave, and they were all departing on the local Khmer style tractor. It's called a Koyun. So these really, really old style, very, very basic kind of lever operated tractors you usually use for transporting long logs of timber. Entire families and all their belongings were just packed on there, and they were driving down the road towards Poi Pet in unison, just hoping to find somewhere to take shelter until they get news that they can return.
Well, joining us now for more on his travels is Nathan Paul Southern of the Eyewitness Project. And Nathan, the report and the stuff you have seen over the last few days, all of that was before this ceasefire that was just announced in the last, this morning basically, or afternoon, evening there. Tell us what that means, where you are. Has that seeped in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we were actually, it was a really, really quite intense day of shelling. I've seen evidence of cluster munitions being used. There was quite a few drone incidents. We were actually inside a displaced persons camp on the outskirts of Uldermanche province, which is where most of the fighting is taking place, when the possible ceasefire agreement had been reached. By that point, we weren't aware of it. We didn't have any connection, and no one at the camp did either. Coming out of that province, then get into more developed Siem Reap, the military was still refueling. Trucks were full of soldiers, kit, water, food, and they were heading out towards the front. So that doesn't mean that this isn't going to go ahead, but I'm not sure if the news had really hit the ground that quickly, or if people are ready to accept it right away. But there's definitely now some optimism here in Cambodia that possibly this could be the end of what's been a really, really intense few days of fighting up in the north. But then there's some concerns that the Thais seem to have this other meeting at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning for the military to also agree to ceasefire. So the next 12 hours are going to be quite intense, I think, and quite a limbo for the people in Cambodia and Thailand.
There will be a limbo, absolutely, as all of this unfolds. But more broadly, what is the mood when you speak to Cambodians there? Whether this ceasefire holds or not, do you get the sense that all of this has kind of hardened nationalism in the country?
Yeah, so across the country, I would say that seems a pretty consistent idea, and it's the same when I've spoken to people across the border as well, even on the phone. I think that the Thai military, more so than the government, was possibly becoming the same thing, and the Cambodian government, both really benefiting from a surge in nationalism right now, and that is happening, and I think you're seeing a lot on social media and the way that people are referring to the conflict and are starting to get behind governments that they were quite skeptical of, just days and weeks ago. But then you go out to the camps where people are displaced, or you go to the communities where they are being shelled, and you speak to them and actually not finding much nationalistic rhetoric, and really people just quite desperate to go back to their old way of life, and telling us repeatedly, we just don't care about Thailand. We don't care about this war. We just don't want it. We just want to be able to live. We want to be able to go back to our farm, and we are just done with this. So, well, it might have worked for popularity for both sides if it is indeed over. I'm hoping that it's not actually, deeply changed the fabric of how people see each other on the border. But then again, when you look at the impact of only a few days of fighting, it does leave a legacy. It could be a legacy of landmines, of cluster munitions, of families displaced, of homes destroyed, and that can build resentment.
Nathan Paul, Southern Director of Operations at the Eyewitness Project on Cambodia's border with Thailand. Thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing. Now, this weekend saw a major adventure theme park called Junglia Okinawa open on northern Okinawa. It is the first major theme park for the island, situated about an hour from U.S. military bases and within a 4-hour flight from some major Asian cities. The park has introduced a dual pricing system with different rates for Japanese and foreign visitors. And to tell us more about this park, I am joined by Owen Ziegler, features editor at the Japan Times. Owen, great to have you on the show, particularly because I understand you were there for the media preview of this park. What were your impressions? What kind of park is it?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So Junglia, as you say, it's Japan's newest theme park, Okinawa's first major theme park. It combines what I would call adventure sports. So think zip lines, kind of bungee jumping inspired attractions. But then it also has kind of more mainstream attractions that are both dinosaur themed, kind of safari themed, and plus an onsen style collection of baths.
And how big a deal is this? I mean, it's pretty massive. I know both the investment that they've put in, about 700 billion yen, but just the size of it too, like 22 different attractions. You described a few of them there. How big is this?
It's a pretty big deal for Okinawa. It's actually the second time that Japan has tried to put this scale of a theme park in Okinawa. The first attempt kind of fell apart, I think, about 10, 15 years ago. That was spearheaded by a team from Universal Studios Japan, located in Osaka. Some corporate restructuring kind of made that not really come about. But the one figure from USJ, as it's called here, Tsuyoshi Morioka, he's now in charge of putting this all together and seems to have really done a good job, at least with the opening. They sold out. I think they're starting to sell out for a couple days in August. So at least in the beginning, it seems to be getting a pretty positive reaction.
And what were your impressions wandering around for the media preview? How does it compare to other parks?
Yeah, so I think the attractions don't necessarily break a lot of new ground. I think, at least where I'm from in America, some new theme parks will say, oh, we have the tallest or the fastest new roller coaster. So if you're looking for, kind of the latest and greatest in theme parks, this might not be maybe up your alley. But I did think there was a lot of charm, maybe a lot of magic, if you really want to go that far, in the attractions themed at children. There's one called Finding Dinosaurs, where they put a lot of personal touches in. For example, when you first enter the ride, they'll ask your name. And as you go through this journey to find this lost baby dinosaur, at the end, upon, sorry for spoilers, the successful completion of that mission, all the names of the people in your group will be read out on this kind of radio to congratulate you. So I can really see, kind of young visitors really lighting up at an experience like that.
And do you get the sense then that young visitors will come? I mean, how much of a deal is this for kind of Japan, also for Asia? As we mentioned, they're hoping for people from around Asia to come visit. They're hoping this will have a pretty big economic impact for Okinawa as well.
Yeah, that's right. They're definitely really pushing that in news and marketing materials, that this is not just a theme park for theme park's sake, but it really does drive, or wants to drive, that kind of positive impact for not just Okinawa, but northern Okinawa in particular. So in the south, you have the capital of Naha, which is fairly well built up in terms of infrastructure, in terms of per capita revenue. But northern Okinawa doesn't really have a lot of tourist draws. They have a pretty famous aquarium, but Junglia is kind of their big major, or second big major draw, I should say. Whether or not tourists come in droves in the future, I don't know just yet. One of the big drawbacks for its location is that there really is no easy way to get up to northern Okinawa by public transportation. There are some expressway buses, but if you're coming from abroad, let's say, and you have some or a couple items of luggage with you, it might prove a tall task to get not only your entire family up to the north of Okinawa, but all your luggage as well.
Owen Ziegler, features editor for the Japan Times. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally, on today's show, it is time for a roundup of some news from the Middle East and the UAE. I'm joined for that by Inzaman Rashid, journalist and broadcaster based in the UAE. And Inzaman, we're starting with news from Syria before we get to right where you are, because Syria says it will hold, or at least an official in Syria says they're expecting to hold parliamentary elections in September.
Yeah, and I think it potentially could be a turning point, or a tightly controlled formality, perhaps, I think, depending on who you ask. For the first time since the ousting of Bashar al-Assad, Syrians will head to the polls this September for parliamentary elections. It's set between the 15th and the 20th of September. They mark a significant, if I guess controversial, milestone in its political transition. It's a system that they have in place, not designed for openness, but for control. Officials say that it's a temporary arrangement because of the lack of up-to-date census data and electoral infrastructure that they have there. Critics basically are saying it's a clear move to consolidate power, particularly among factions aligned with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. They're the once designated terrorist group by much of the international community. But this is the election. This election will really be the first kind of real test of Syria's 5-year transitional roadmap, which they formalized earlier this year in an interim constitution. Whilst the new charter kind of offers a nod towards political pluralism and even perhaps promises to uphold basic rights, which they've suggested, many observers kind of say that the details, especially around freedom of expression, representation of minorities, remain pretty vague. And I think there's cautious interest from abroad. The United Nations and some European powers are taking a wait and kind of see approach. Washington for now remains firmly on the sidelines, refusing to recognize the legitimacy of the transitional government or consider lifting sanctions until the verifiable human rights safeguards are in place. But I think what's important to note is that the wider Gulf countries are really encouraging this, especially here in the UAE. And I think the vote may offer a glimpse, however faint that may be, of hope of Syria's post-Assad political direction. But I think the question for many Syrians is whether this is the beginning of something new or simply a rebranding of the old.
Well, we'll be following that going forward a lot as well in Zaman, but let's move to some news from where you are. There's been some major growth, I understand, in Dubai's use of public transport. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, interesting. So a report was published today, which suggested basically that Dubai's public transport kind of network carried 395.3 million riders in the first half of 2025. That's a 9% rise over the same period of last year. So that's an average of around 2.18 million people per day. That's across the metro, the trams, the bus lines, marine transport, and taxis as well. So the metro led the way. They accounted for around 36.5% of the trips, and taxis at 26%. And the RTA chief, Matar Al-Taya, said that this is a surge that reflects more than just a rebound in movement. It's confidence in infrastructure. And he basically has also said that it's a validation of the city's transit strategy, safe, smart, and scaling with demand. So since 2006, Chris, the share of journeys using public and shared transport has climbed from just 6% to 21.6% by the end of last year. The aim is to boost that to 25% by 2030. That's all part of Dubai's push to reduce congestion and emissions. And I think the key lever for that is this new blue line that is under construction. And wherever you drive around Dubai right now, construction is everywhere, but on the roads in particular, where they're building this new blue line, it's going to be 30 kilometers, 14 stations, will serve 9 major districts with 1 million residents. And it's the absolute core to Dubai's 2040 urban master plan. And of course, Etihad Rail, that's going to be introduced next year. The first passenger fleet of those trains will be introduced next year, and that will eventually link all of the Emirates together, because it's a bit bonkers right now. You can't get a train out to Abu Dhabi, or if you want to go to Sharjah if you're in Dubai. So Emirates Etihad Rail will definitely be that key kind of element in Dubai's infrastructure and transport sector.
So there's a lot happening in that infrastructure transport sector. But finally, Inzamam, we did want to talk about the heat that is a thing in Dubai, has always been a thing in Dubai. And I understand that malls are becoming the latest place to beat that heat.
Yeah, I can tell you it's a thing right now. It's actually the hottest period right now, and it's going to be even hotter over the next few days. It'll probably hit around 50 degrees Celsius, and the humidity is ridiculous. It's not the best place to have glasses, because as soon as you step out from the AC into the humidity, you're all fogged up and you need windscreen wipers. But you're right, things are moving to the malls, because Sheikh Hamdan, the Crown Prince, has personally championed an initiative which is Dubai's inaugural Mallathon, which is happening this August. And what it basically means is they're going to turn major shopping malls into running and walking tracks between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. before the shops open. So this is going to be free to the public. They will be able to feature in 2.5 kilometers, 5 kilometers, and 10-kilometer distances, with a kind of a relaxed any pace walk or run. They'll have hydration stations along the way. And of course, you're in this air-conditioned environment, which means you don't have to be running out on the harbour or along Dubai Marina in this sweltering heat. And this is quite interesting, because I noticed this when I came and visited Dubai over the years before I actually moved here, is that if you go to the mall very early in the morning, you do find a group of people usually walking. But now Dubai has decided that actually let's get people all in malls across the city and get them walking and running, and we'll provide some refreshments along the way. So definitely a way to beat the heat and get running in malls.
That is one way to beat the heat. Are there others, Inzamam? Because I understand, or you have written for our website about the fact that summer in Dubai is not such a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm experiencing it right now. The roads are a lot quieter. I love that, because it means that it doesn't take you 40 minutes, maybe an hour, or even longer to get to the other side of town. The swimming pool doesn't have kids cannonballing into it and playing Cocomelon on their iPads and all that kind of stuff. You can get a reservation, which is pretty handy. Usually everything is pretty much booked up from 6 o'clock onwards, so I can go for a nice relaxed meal. So yeah, it's a pretty nice place to be in the summer. As long as you've got your AC on, wherever you may be, it's pretty sweet.
Inzamam Rashid, enjoy that summer over there with nobody else around. Journalist and broadcaster based in the UAE. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Henry King and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Termack. Goodbye and thanks for listening.